My name is Mike Buckworth. I'm a partner at Buckworth Solicitors, and today I'm going to talk about shareholders agreements. Any discussion of shareholders agreements really starts at the Companies Act. That's what sets out the statutory position. And the Companies Act really splits control of a company in two ways, between the board and the shareholders. The board do the day-to-day business of the company. They, buy the staples, do the stationery, take on employees. The shareholders do the big-ticket decisions, so things like changing the share capital, issuing new shares. And what we're doing in a shareholders agreement is we're, where appropriate, amending that statutory position to create something new. There are three main circumstances where clients would think about putting in place a shareholders agreement. The first one is where you've got two founders, probably with a 50-50 split. The reason you want a shareholders agreement there is because if both of those shareholders were to fall out, you end up with a deadlock position and the company can't operate. So the idea of the shareholders agreement is to change that. The second circumstance is almost the mandatory circumstance where you've got investors coming on board. Pretty much investors will always want to see a shareholders agreement to govern the way that their participation in the company will work. And the third one, the final one, is where you're using some kind of investment relief. EIS and SEIS are the two obvious ones. With both of those schemes, which are tax efficient schemes, there are certain things that a company can and cannot do, and you'll want to make sure that those are enshrined in the shareholders agreement. There are actually probably three really main types of provisions that are really important. The first is deadlock provisions. The second is the provisions around sort of reserved matters, and the third is the share transfer provisions that we'll talk about later. So taking the first two, deadlock provisions are really provisions that try to break a situation where the shareholders can't agree anymore. So, two, maybe three shareholders with equal shares, they've all fallen out, they can't do business anymore, and the company is effectively frozen as a result. What the deadlock does is it says, if and when that happens, then certain steps will be taken to break that deadlock and enable the company to continue operating. The most common approach to deadlock provisions is something called a Texas shootout. And what that does effectively is it gives each of the shareholders an opportunity to name a price at which they would buy the shares of the other shareholders, and then either the highest or sometimes the lowest price offer gets bought. So the shareholder who makes the highest offer is forced to buy the other shareholder's shares. That obviously resolves a deadlock. It means that that one of those troublesome shareholders has been taken out and somebody has a majority. The other common way of dealing with deadlocks is actually just to wind the company up. It's a little bit of a nuclear option, but sometimes it is actually the only thing that would work. So quite often there's a sort of residual winding up provision if nothing else works. The second type of provision that is seen in almost every shareholders agreement is this shareholders matter provision. And what that is really doing is it's transferring power from the board to the shareholders. So as we've said earlier, the day-to-day management of the company is run by the board. The shareholders tend not to get involved except for big ticket stuff. But there will be certain circumstances that the shareholders would want to be involved. A good example might be if the board want to enter into a transaction for which creates a liability to the company of, let's say, more than 50,000 a year. In those circumstances, the shareholders may actually want to have some kind of veto right over that decision, and that's really something that would be dealt with in shareholder matters. A key sort of provision in the shareholders agreements is share transfers and how they're dealt with, and there are really three key mechanisms that you tend to see. Sometimes not all of them, but there are three possibilities there. The first one's a preemption provision, and that's the most common provision that you would see. And what that is basically saying is that if a shareholder wants to sell, they have a third-party buyer who has offered them to buy their shares at a certain price. They are forced to offer those shares to the remaining shareholders at the same price. The idea there is to keep the shares within the company and to avoid, for example, a situation where a shareholder sells to a competitor. That's something that arguably may not be a good idea, and a preemption provision aims to stop that happening. The second provision is something called a tag-along, and a tag-along is a concept where if a third-party buyer has managed to get 75%, for example, can be any number, but normally 75% of the shareholders to agree to sell their shares to him, then he's forced to make an offer to the remaining 25% of the shareholders to buy their shares as well. The great thing for those minority shareholders, that 25%, is it's not mandatory. They don't have to sell. They just have that option, so it gives them an ability to exit if they want to. The final provision is called a drag-along, and this is really something that's come from public law, so the law around listed companies. And generally you would see this at 90%. And what it says basically is that if a third-party buyer has managed to secure the option to buy 90% of the shares, then he can force the sale of that remaining 10%. And the point here really is that a buyer who's buying 90%, probably he actually wants 100% of the shares. He doesn't want that 10% to potentially annoy him. So in those circumstances, for the valuation of the business, it's ideal for him to be able to force out that 10%. Which provisions get included quite often just depends on the negotiating position of the parties. Minority shareholders tend not to like drag-alongs because it can mean they have to sell their shares, but they tend to like tag-alongs. Majority shareholders, it tends to be the other way around. So it very much depends who you're acting for and what the circumstances are. But those are the three options really. Shareholders agreements actually come with a whole suite of documents. The main agreement tends to be the shareholders agreements. If you're doing an investment round, then there's obviously some investment documentation as well. On top of all that, there's board minutes, shareholder minutes, and company's house filings. And the great thing about us is that when we quote our fixed fee for doing the shareholder agreement, we include all of that additional documentation in there with it. There are three reasons why I think you should use Buckworth Solicitors for shareholders agreements. The first one is that we specialise in startups. Pretty much everything we do is startup related. The second thing is that all of our startup work is on fixed fee. So when we quote a fixed fee, that's what you get charged, and that includes the whole suite of documents. And the third thing really is the sort of personal service that you get from us. I used to work in the city for one of the big US firms. One of the really key things that we're trying to do at Buckworth Solicitors is to provide a really personal service so that clients know they can pick up the phone to me, as and when they need me.